Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to Encounter. I'm your host, Dave Alexander, and I have two young ladies joining me today. Kelly Devine, who is the Director of Christian Education and Programming. She's also going to somewhat be co-hosting with me today. We're going to double team Donna Spearman, who's the chairperson for the Martin Luther King celebration at Central United Methodist Church. And I guess just a little bit, maybe Donna, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been a member at Central and what you're involved in.
Okay. Well, I just think of myself as being an ordinary person. I've been in this area for 41 years, hailing to you from Silver Spring, Maryland. We are members of Central United Methodist Church for 36 years, and this has been just a wonderful, wonderful journey for us. It's a great church with a phenomenal, I think, social conscience. I went to school, did my college work in Washington, D.C., and during that time where there was a lot of civil unrest and Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy during that whole era, and the Vietnam era where people were doing a lot of protesting, marching, and making their views known. So that's sort of important to me, sort of growing up in that time. Professionally, I came to this area and I worked in social work for people with developmental disabilities and their families for 35 years. Wow. I'm married, been married for 41 years and have 2 adult children who live outside the area. Yeah, that's sort of me in a capsule.
Okay, and Kelly, I know we've gone through this a week ago or so, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself too.
I am a lifelong resident, born and raised in the Triple Cities. I love it here. I am the Director of Christian Education for Central United Methodist Church, and I've actually taken on some additional tasks working with youth at Endwell United Methodist Church. So it's been keeping me busy.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that, to start the show, we're going to read a little thing on the meaning of Martin Luther King Jr. It's important that everybody fully understands the history of Martin Luther King Jr. and I kind of found this brief assessment of him that I thought kind of really tells his story, and we're going to take turns sharing this with the audience. A brief assessment of the story of this man might begin with his personal qualities. Like all of us, King was a complex human being with faults and failings, as well as strengths and successes. Perhaps his outstanding characteristic is courage. From the moment he assumed a leadership role in the Montgomery boycott, King was harassed and threatened. He was a sensitive man, passionate in love with life. The thick skin of his public personality masked a wounded spirit. If you've ever written a letter to the editor and taken an unpopular stand on an emotional or controversial issue, you know a little about the fear of harassment and the discomfort of a threatening phone call or a hate letter. King lived for 12 years in such a crucible until finally James Earl Ray carried out that threat. It is difficult to appreciate the courage of King's choice to commit himself to freedom and justice and peace. There is something of the servant of the Lord in the life of Martin Luther Jr. King.
What sustained such courage? In the case of King, the answer is clearly faith and hope. King believed that our God is able, that God is powerful and loving, and there is the potential for good in every person. Shortly before the bombing of his parsonage during the Montgomery boycott, King was awakened by a typical phone call. It began with a racist slur and ended with a threat to his life. This particular call released in King all his fears and frustrations. Unable to sleep, he sat at his kitchen table plotting a way to resign from leadership without appearing a coward. Finally, King bowed in audible prayer, acknowledging his inability to cope and surrendering himself to God. King tells us he felt the overwhelming presence of God, who erased his fears and filled him with his power to continue. King's Christian faith buttressed his courage, his courageous courage, nonviolent love, his dream of a just community.
There are many images of Martin Luther King Jr., but perhaps the most fitting and fundamental title is one by which he referred to himself, minister. Although King's activities drew him into the secular arena, he not only remained true to his call to ministry, he restored the social dimension to contemporary Christian ministry. King preached the word and was pastor to the people of a national, perhaps global parish. Not every minister will be placed in a national pulpit, but King declared that every pulpit and every parish have national and global concerns. For Reverend King, Christian faith was personal and social, but there was no private gospel.
The primary concern of King's ministry was to transform an evil, unjust society into a just and righteous community. This was the content of his dream, the goal of his work. King achieved a solid balance between his social concern and his religious faith. He struggled against three interrelated structural evils: segregation, poverty, and war. But in each case, he uncovered the moral and spiritual roots of these social injustice: racism, materialism, individualism, and militarism and violence. King understood these flaws in American society to be a systematic rather than superficial, requiring a radical restructuring of society. But King saw deeper than social structure. He focused on the human heart. King proposed not a revolutionary program, but a revolution of values. His dream of a just community begins in the conversation of the human heart and results in the transformation of a society. Genuine and spiritual conversations result in creative social actions, and genuine social reform requires a change of heart.
King can obviously be called a peacemaker. He took a forthright stand in opposition to the war in Vietnam, and he adhered to the nonviolence as the only practical and moral way to eliminate social evil. But perhaps King's real claim to the title Peacemaker is that his ministry illustrates the words of Pope Paul VI: "If you want peace, work for justice." King's nonviolent campaign distributed the illusionary calm of a nation characterized by segregation, poverty, and self-serving foreign policy. King recognized that there was no peace without justice, and the genuine peace was a product of a struggle for a just community. Perhaps the best description of the meaning and purpose of King's life is his own, anticipating his eulogy.
I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did not try to feed the hungry. That I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that he did.
Okay, one of the goals of, I guess, our conversation today is on Sunday, January 13th, there's going to be the celebration of Martin Luther King, and maybe you can tell us a little about what actually is going to happen that day and kind of go into all the details.
Okay. Well, it's going to be just a wonderful program, a commemorative program. We have done this for over 25 years to celebrate the life and the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, we like to remember that he was a man of God. First and foremost, he was a pastor, and he was an educated man. You know, he saw something in America that he wanted to change, and he felt that it started with one person. He fought for equality, he fought for equal education rights, voting, that the hungry would be fed and that America would be all that it could be. So with that being said, that is why we celebrate the holiday, to keep this dream at the forefront of individuals and know that this wasn't something just happened by accident. This was something that someone put a lot of thought and effort into. And so having that said, our format this year is going to be a conversation actually between the pastor of Central, the Reverend Mark Marino, and also the pastor of Cornerstone Community Church, the Reverend Greg Johnson. True to the Methodist style, we're going to have music. We have wonderful soloists. We have Jennifer Woolfolk, who's been known in this area as an educator and also a singer for many years, who will be rendering two solos, two of Dr. King's favorite, and she will accompany herself on the piano. We're going to have the wonderful Beth Moffett, who will also give us another solo. She's a young person of our church, 18 years old, going to college, who just has a phenomenal voice that, believe me, you will not forget. And we're going to have a student from UE who will be doing a musical selection or two on the flute. This will be coupled with a reading that we're going to have done by someone in the community. Also, we're going to have congregationals to sing some songs to just put us in that spirit and that mood. We will end with our traditional candlelight service with our making a circle around the church, lighting our candles, ending the service being lit by this candle, that symbolism of us being one. And then we will journey downstairs where we will have a reception where the people who participated in the program will be there. We can talk further and just fellowship.
Okay. Now, you kind of said that you have two speakers, Greg Johnson,
yes,
and then Reverend Mark Marino.
Yes.
It's going to be a conversation between the two
yes.
of them?
Yes, it will
Okay.
be.
And now, what's the background for Greg? Do you know anything about, besides?
No, I know that he's the pastor of Cornerstone,
Okay.
and he's come to this area. He's very well respected. He is working on his doctorate.
Okay.
He's a Baptist pastor, and I really don't know a lot of the particulars about him, except he has an excellent reputation. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And now for a lot of people, it is Sunday, 3 o'clock.
Yes.
And Central United Methodist Church is located on Nanticoke Avenue.
Yes.
And for those, I guess, the easiest thing to say, it's across the street from the cider mill, basically.